Have you ever looked down at your bare foot and wondered if it was trying to tell you something? Because it turns out it has been for thousands of years, and almost nobody has been paying attention. Right now, before we go any further, take off your shoe if you can. Look at your second toe, the one sitting right next to your big toe. Is it longer? Does it stretch past the big toe, even just a little? If the answer is yes, you are carrying something inside your DNA that scientists have now traced across 930 genetic markers, millions of years of human evolution, and a migration story that began before any civilization ever put chisel to stone. And if the answer is no, stay right here, because your foot is telling a different story that is just as extraordinary. If this kind of content makes you think, makes you look at yourself differently, makes you lean in, hit that like button right now, subscribe so you never miss another video like this, and share it with someone who will immediately take off their shoe after watching. Let us get into this. Most people who notice their second toe is longer chalk it up to a quirk, something random. Maybe they joke about it. Maybe they have heard someone call it a Greek foot and left it at that. But here's what almost nobody realizes. That tiny difference in length between two toes is not random at all. It is the result of a genetic architecture so complex, so layered, that it rivals the genetic coding behind how tall you are. It is the end product of millions of years of evolutionary pressure. It is a biological signal that connects your foot to the feet of ancestors who walked across terrains you have never seen, in climates you have never felt, surviving challenges that shaped not just their lives, but your body. Let us start at the beginning. Not with Greece, not with sculpture, with a bone. Inside your foot, behind each toe, there's a long bone called a metatarsal. 5 of them, 1 for each toe. The one behind your big toe is the first metatarsal. The one behind your second toe is the second metatarsal. Now here is the thing that most people get completely wrong when they look at their feet. If your second toe appears longer than your big toe, it is not actually because the second toe grew too long. It is because the first metatarsal, the bone behind your big toe, stopped growing earlier than it should have. The growth plate closed prematurely during your development inside the womb. That made the bone behind your big toe shorter than the bone behind your second toe. And because your big toe starts further back on a shorter bone, it sits behind the second toe when you look at your foot from above. So what you are looking at is not a toe that grew too much. You're looking at a bone that stopped too soon. That distinction matters enormously because it changes the entire question. The question is no longer, why is my second toe long? The real question is, why did my first metatarsal stop growing earlier? And the answer to that question leads directly into your genome. This condition was formally described by an American orthopedic surgeon named Dudley Joy Morton in the 1920s. He studied the biomechanics of the foot and identified this shorter first metatarsal as a clinical variation. Medicine named it Morton's toe after him. But here is the irony. Ancient Greece was celebrating this foot shape nearly 2,500 years before Morton ever wrote a medical paper about it. The ancient Greeks did not see this as a disorder. They saw it as the definition of physical perfection. Not one ideal among several. Not a preference among competing standards. The ideal. The single standard of the perfect human form. When Greek sculptors carved gods and goddesses, they carved them with a second toe extending past the first. Because in their philosophy, the gods embodied flawless geometry. The foot of a divine being had to follow perfect proportion, and perfect proportion, in their eyes, required that specific shape. This was not just one sculptor's personal taste. It was embedded into the entire artistic tradition, the Venus de Milo. The bronze warriors discovered off the coast of Riasi, the caryatids standing on the Erechtheion in Athens. Every major piece of classical Greek sculpture followed the same standard. The second toe reaches forward. The foot carries this specific silhouette. And when the Romans absorbed Greek culture, they carried the preference into their own art, the longer. Second toe continued appearing in Roman statuary across centuries and across the empire. Then came the Renaissance. In the 14th and 15th centuries, European artists rediscovered classical antiquity and deliberately modeled their work on Greek and Roman ideals. The longer second toe came back. Michelangelo carved it into the foot of David. Botticelli painted it on his figures. And then, centuries later, when a French sculptor named Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi designed the Statue of Liberty using classical proportions, he used the same ancient standard. The most recognized statue in America, standing in New York Harbor with her torch raised, has a longer second toe. For over 2,500 years, the world's greatest artists kept returning to the same foot shape. From Athens to Rome to Florence to New York, the same proportion, the same toe extending forward, the same bone behind the big toe sitting slightly shorter. And for all that time, the world treated it as an aesthetic choice, a cultural preference, a question of what beauty looks like. But the real question is scientific. Why does this variation exist? Why has it persisted across every population on Earth? And why is the genetic machinery behind it so extraordinarily complex? Ancestry DNA, one of the largest consumer genetics companies in the world, identified 930 genetic markers associated with second toe length. Take a moment to let that number settle. 930 markers. For context, eye color, something most people think of as a defining genetic trait, is influenced by roughly 16 genes. Height, which is one of the most genetically complex traits scientists study, is influenced by approximately 700 to 1,000 variants. The relative length of two bones in your foot sits at that same level of genetic complexity as your entire vertical height. Your body committed as much genetic infrastructure to the shape of your foot as it committed to how tall you stand. That does not happen by accident. That does not happen by chance. Evolution does not maintain nearly 1,000 genetic markers for a trait that is biologically meaningless. Genetic drift, the natural process through which unused or irrelevant genetic variations fade over time, would have simplified this system long ago if it did not matter. The fact that 930 markers have been preserved across the entire human species, across every continent and every population, tells you something profound. This trait has mattered. Something about this difference in bone length has been influencing human survival for a very, very long time. The trait runs in families with strong heritability. If one of your parents has a longer second toe, the probability that you have one increases significantly. The genetic signal is strong enough that a DNA testing company can take a saliva sample, analyze your markers, and predict your toe shape with meaningful accuracy before they ever look at your foot. Your toe length is written into your genome the same way your blood type is written into it. It was not chosen, it was inherited, passed from parent to child through thousands of generations, from ancestors who lived and walked and survived on ground that was nothing like the ground you stand on today. And here is where the story becomes truly remarkable. Those 930 markers are not distributed equally across all human populations. Different ethnic groups, different geographic regions, show different frequencies of this trait. Globally, roughly 20 to 30% of the human population has a longer second toe. But within specific populations, that frequency varies in ways that are not random. Studies conducted among the Idoma people of Nigeria found prevalence rates closer to 37%. European populations cluster around 20 to 25%. East Asian populations tend to show lower rates. The trait is present everywhere on Earth, every ethnicity, every continent, every population. But the frequency differences tell a story about migration routes, about where populations traveled, about which environments they settled in, and about which genetic traits those environments rewarded. This is population genetics, working in real time across geological timescales. And the mechanism that drove these differences comes down to something you use every single day without thinking about it. Walking. Pause here for a second, because what I am about to explain connects your foot to the entire history of human evolution in a way that most people never consider. Human beings are the only fully bipedal primates on Earth. We are the only species that walks upright as our primary and natural mode of movement. Every other primate, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, uses a combination of knuckle walking and tree climbing. Their feet function more like hands. The big toe is opposable. It grips. It wraps around branches. The foot is flexible and mobile, built for climbing and grasping. The human foot is the opposite. Our big toe is locked parallel to the other toes. We have a rigid arch running from heel to ball. The entire structure is engineered for one specific purpose: forward propulsion across flat and varied ground over long distances. The human foot is not a gripping tool. Loading can cause calluses, can create inflammation in the forefoot, can reduce efficiency during high-speed running on flat, even surfaces. From a pure sprint-on-pavement perspective, the longer first metatarsal may be the mechanically superior design. But here is the problem with that argument. If Morton's toe were simply a disadvantage, natural selection would have driven it toward extinction long ago. You do not maintain a complex 930 marker genetic trait in 20 to 30% of the global population for hundreds of thousands of years if that trait is purely harmful. The math does not work. The biology does not support it. Something else is happening. And the most compelling hypothesis comes from terrain. Human ancestors did not walk on pavement. They did not walk on flat, predictable manufactured surfaces. They walked on rocky hillsides, on uneven forest floors, on mountain slopes with shifting ground underfoot, on riverbanks, on plains scattered with stones and roots and unpredictable surfaces that demanded not just forward efficiency, but lateral stability, the ability to shift weights sideways quickly without falling, the ability to maintain balance on ground that was not level and not consistent. On surfaces like these, a foot with a longer second metatarsal may distribute weight across a slightly wider platform during lateral and shifting movement. It may provide subtle but real stability advantages that a narrower, first metatarsal dominant foot does not offer on uneven terrain. Populations living in mountainous regions, in heavily forested highlands, on rough and varied ground may have been quietly, gradually, generation by generation, selected for the foot architecture that served them better in that environment. The terrain shaped the selection pressure. The selection pressure shaped which genetic variants were passed on more frequently. And those variants, all 9 to 30 of them, accumulated in certain populations and carried the trait forward into every generation since. Your second toe is not longer because ancient sculptors decided it was beautiful. Your second toe may be longer because your ancestors navigated terrain where that foot shape kept them alive. The art came after. The biology came first. Now let us talk about the classification, a system that most people have heard about, because it is both genuinely useful and genuinely misunderstood. Anthropologists and podiatrists use a framework that sorts human feet into several primary shapes. These categories have ancient place names attached to them: Egyptian foot, Greek foot, Roman foot, Celtic foot, Germanic foot, and those names have caused enormous confusion about what these categories actually represent. The Egyptian foot is characterized by a big toe that is the longest, with each subsequent toe gradually tapering shorter in a smooth diagonal line. This is the most common foot shape in the world, found in roughly 50 to 60% of the global population. Ancient Egyptian art depicted this shape consistently. The pharaohs were carved with this profile. Mummies that have been studied confirm the shape was prevalent in the Nile Valley, but the name is a cultural label, not a genetic certificate. The Greek foot, as you now know, is Morton's toe. The second toe longer than the first, found in roughly 20 to 30% of the population. Named because Greek sculptors idealized it, not because it originated in Greece, or because it is more common among people of Greek ancestry. This shape appears in populations across every continent on Earth. The Roman foot features the first 3 toes at roughly equal length, creating a squared profile across the front of the foot, found in about 10 to 15% of the population. Named for foot shapes seen in Roman statuary. The Celtic and Germanic classifications are less standardized in clinical literature, more variable depending on the source, and are primarily used in folk anthropology rather than formal medical research. Here's the critical point that cannot be overstated. These names are historical artifacts, applied to biological variation. They are convenient labels, not ancestry claims. If you have a Greek foot, you're not more likely to have Greek ancestors. If you have an Egyptian foot, you did not descend from the pharaohs. If you have a Roman foot, your family did not march in a Roman legion. These shapes appear across every ethnic group, every geographic origin, every family history on Earth. Whether your first metatarsal is shorter than your second are ancient. Foot types are real biological categories. The civilizational names are just the labels that stuck through history. Your foot shape is not your ethnicity. Your foot shape is a product of your evolutionary history. And those two things, ethnicity and evolutionary history, are not the same thing. Ethnicity is a recent social and cultural construct measured in centuries. Evolutionary history is a biological record measured in millions of years. Here is another CTA moment, and this one is personal. If you are watching this video right now and you have never really thought about what your body is carrying, the history written into your bones, the migrations recorded in your genome, the survival stories encoded in the shape of your foot, I want you to do something. Screenshot this video. Send it to the most curious person you know, the one who always wants to understand why things are the way they are, the one who would take off their shoe right now and look. Tag us, share it, because the conversation this video starts is worth having. And subscribe if you have not yet. New videos go up regularly, and you do not want to miss where we go next. Now let us bring this all the way forward, because the science of your foot does not stop at evolution. It connects to something happening right now in laboratories, through ordinary consumer products that millions of people are already using. When you spit into a small tube and send it to a DNA testing company, the algorithm that processes your sample is not just looking for your ethnic background percentages or your health risk markers. It is checking 930 specific locations in your genome to predict the shape of your foot. Not because foot shape is the most medically important thing a lab can tell you, but because the sheer density of genetic information encoded in that one simple trait makes it a powerful signal about your ancestry and your biology, a trait that complex lab can tell you. But because the sheer density of genetic information encoded in that one simple trait makes it a powerful signal about your ancestry and your biology, a trait that complex carries a lot of information, and the information it carries runs in a direct line through every generation of your family, back through time, back through migration patterns, back through terrain and climate and survival pressure, back to hominins walking upright across African landscapes 4 to 6 million years ago. The 930 markers that control whether your first metatarsal is shorter than your second are ancient. They predate every civilization that has ever named this foot shape. They predate Greek sculpture and Egyptian temples and Roman legions. They predate agriculture. They predate language as we know it. They were being sorted and selected and passed down through generations of human ancestors long before any human being ever had the concept of beauty or art or culture to apply to them. And yet, when humans did develop culture, when they developed art and philosophy and ideals of beauty, they looked at this foot and called it perfect. In Greece, in Rome, in the Renaissance, in the 19th century when the Statue of Liberty was designed, something about this foot shape, across thousands of years and multiple entirely separate cultural traditions, kept calling to the human aesthetic sense. There is a hypothesis worth sitting with here. Perhaps the ancient Greeks were not arbitrarily selecting this foot shape as beautiful. Perhaps the human eye, trained by millions of years of evaluating physical fitness and potential mates and allies, recognized something in the proportions of the Morton's toe foot that corresponded to real biological information. Perhaps the aesthetic preference was never separate from the biological signal. Perhaps they were the same thing, dressed in the language of art. We cannot prove that, but we cannot dismiss it either. Because the track record of that preference, 2,500 years, multiple independent cultures, the most recognized sculptural form in the Western world, suggests it was not arbitrary. Something was being recognized. Something was being valued. And now we know that what was being carved into marble across millennia was a 930 marker genetic variation that connects your body to the oldest chapters of human history. Look at your foot one more time. Whether your second toe is longer, or your big toe leads the way, or your first 3 toes stand roughly equal, you are looking at the result of millions of years of engineering. You are looking at a structure that was redesigned from a grasping primate foot into a walking and running human foot over an evolutionary timeline so long it is almost impossible to picture. You are looking at bones whose relative lengths were shaped by terrain your ancestors walked on, in places that may no longer even exist in the same form. You are looking at a genetic signature that survived migrations and ice ages, sea crossings, and everything else the human story has thrown at the species. The Greeks looked at the foot with the longer second toe and called it divine. Michelangelo carved it and called it art. Scientists sequenced it and called it a 930 marker complex trait. And you have been walking on it your whole life without a second thought. There is something humbling about that. Something that makes the ordinary act of standing up and walking across a room feel a little different once you understand what you are carrying. Every step you take is the current expression of a blueprint that has been refined across a time span. What you're carrying. Every step you take is the current expression of a blueprint that has been refined across a time span. Longer than any written history, longer than any civilization, longer than any idea that any human being has ever had. Your foot is older than everything. And now, finally, you know how to read it. Drop a comment below. Tell me, is your second toe longer than your big toe? Is your big toe the longest? Are your first 3 toes about even? I genuinely want to see the breakdown in the comments because we are building a real data picture right here in this community. And if this video gave you something to think about, something to look at differently, something to share, do exactly that. Share it. Subscribe. Because the next time you look down at your feet, you will see something completely different than what you saw before you pressed play.